65% of children alive today have been vaccinated with a dose made in India. The largest single-site oil refinery on Earth sits on the coast of Gujarat. The pressure vessels holding together refineries in Saudi Arabia and South Korea were built in a town most people have never heard of. And the software protecting data for 75 Fortune 500 companies, including NASA and Pfizer, was written by engineers recruited from rural high schools in Tamil Nadu. None of these companies are household names in the West. They almost never appear in the business press unless something goes wrong. And yet, if you removed them from the global economy tomorrow, the systems they quietly hold together would begin to fail within months. This is not a story about India's potential. It is a story about what India has already built and why the world has barely noticed. There is an assumption baked into how Western media covers global industry. It goes like this: the important companies are American or European, or at a stretch, Japanese. Innovation happens there. Quality comes from there. Other countries manufacture the parts and wait their turn. It is an assumption so deeply embedded that most people never examine it. It just feels like common sense. What the next 20 minutes will do is dismantle it, one company at a time. Start with the most basic question a civilization can face. How do you keep children from dying of preventable diseases at scale? The answer, for most of the world, runs through a horse farm on the outskirts of Pune. Cyrus Poonawalla founded the Serum Institute of India in 1966 on a stud farm he already owned for horse racing. The initial business was extracting antitoxins from retired racehorses. That is not a metaphor. That is literally what they did. From that starting point, the Serum Institute became the largest vaccine manufacturer on Earth by volume, producing more than 1.5 billion doses per year and supplying 170 countries. It is the foundational supplier for WHO and UNICEF's global immunization programs. In 2012, the company acquired Bilthoven Biologicals from the Dutch government, gaining the rights to manufacture injectable polio vaccine, a Dutch government asset transferred to an Indian company, now protecting children on every inhabited continent. When people talk about global health infrastructure, they name the WHO, the Gates Foundation, Gavi. These are the visible institutions, but the actual manufacturing, the physical production of doses that go into arms, runs through Pune. The Serum Institute is not a supplier to the global health system. It is the global health system's production floor. Now move from biological survival to food, specifically to the machine that produces most of it. If you asked a farmer in the American Midwest to name the world's biggest tractor manufacturer, they would say John Deere. They would be wrong. The world's highest volume tractor producer is Mahindra, headquartered in Maharashtra, which has built over 7 million tractors across its history and consistently leads global volume annually. It is also the only tractor brand on Earth to have won both the Deming Application Prize and the Japan Quality Medal, the two most demanding quality certifications in industrial manufacturing. Mahindra didn't beat John Deere in a press release. American farmers noticed that legacy brands were getting more complex, more expensive to repair, and harder to maintain without dealer support. Mahindra offered something those brands had stopped offering: durability a farmer could service himself. The US market responded. Mahindra is now one of the top-selling tractor brands in America, not because it undercut on price, but because it filled a gap the incumbents had created by abandoning it. There is a pattern here. Hold that thought. The same pattern shows up in medicine, and it starts with a single pill. Dr. Reddy's Laboratories was founded in 1984 by Angie Reddy in Hyderabad, when it challenged the patent-protecting omeprazole, a widely used ulcer medication. It cracked open the US generic drug market. The cost of essential medicines for millions of Americans dropped in ways no domestic competitor had been willing to engineer. Dr. Reddy's became the first Asian pharmaceutical company outside Japan to list on the New York Stock Exchange. The financial press noted it briefly and moved on. What they didn't cover was the downstream consequence. When a company from Hyderabad breaks the pricing structure of the American pharmaceutical market, the people who benefit most are patients in Ohio and Texas paying less for drugs they need to stay alive. Now apply the same logic to biologics, the most expensive and complex drugs in existence. Biocon was founded in 1978. Kiran Mazumdar-Shaw started it in a rented garage in Bangalore with 10,000 rupees. Her first commercial project was extracting an enzyme from papayas to sell to breweries. That is the origin story. From a papaya enzyme, Biocon built a company that achieved FDA approval for biologic drugs and entered both the US and European markets with biosimilars for cancer and diabetes treatments. Biosimilars are what happen when a competitor proves they can make the same molecule to the same standard. Biocon proved it. The price of those treatments came down for patients who had been priced out of them. A garage in Bangalore, a papaya, drugs that now reach patients in the United States and Germany who could not otherwise afford them. But here's where the story shifts. Every company so far succeeded by filling a gap the West left open. Serum Institute filled the vaccine production gap. Mahindra filled the durability gap. Dr. Reddy's filled the generic drug gap. Biocon filled the biosimilar gap. The next company didn't fill a gap. It walked into a fully occupied market and competed head-to-head with the largest software companies on Earth. Zoho Corporation has over 100 million users. Its valuation is estimated at over $12 billion. It competes directly with Salesforce, Microsoft, and Google Workspace. Its profit margins are approximately 40%, and it has accepted zero external investment, not a single outside dollar. Sridhar Vembu owns and controls the company entirely. That fact makes Western technology investors visibly uncomfortable. The assumption in Silicon Valley is that you need venture capital to scale a software company. Zoho spent 3 decades proving that wrong. It also did something no major Western tech company has done. It built a recruitment pipeline from rural Tamil Nadu high schools, not engineering colleges, high schools. Zoho operates its own schools, trains graduates who would never otherwise have reached enterprise software, and puts them to work writing code that competes with the best products Microsoft can build. Between 2023 and 2025, the Indian government migrated 1.2 million central government employee email accounts to Zoho Mail, not Gmail, not Outlook, Zoho. That is both a commercial win and a signal that something structural is changing in how India thinks about digital sovereignty. Now consider what the Tata acquisition of Jaguar Land Rover tells you about who gets to own the symbols of industrial prestige. Ford had owned Jaguar and Land Rover for years and lost money on both. In 2008, Ford sold them to Tata Motors for $2.3 billion. The reaction in the Western press ranged from skepticism to mild condescension. The argument, stated politely in editorials and less politely in comment sections, was that an Indian conglomerate had no business running British luxury car brands. Quality would decline, the brands would be hollowed out. Within 4 years, JLR had become Tata Motors' single most profitable business unit. Manufacturing stayed in Coventry and Solihull. Engineering teams stayed intact. What changed was capital allocation, investment in new models, and strategic clarity about what the brands actually were. The Range Rover Sport and the Jaguar F-Type arrived under Tata ownership. The financial results followed. The analysts who predicted decline were not slightly wrong. They were structurally wrong in a way that reveals the assumption underneath the prediction. The assumption was that Indian ownership meant lower standards. The outcome was the opposite. And then there is the infrastructure that nobody talks about, because it has no consumer-facing brand at all. Larsen & Toubro's heavy engineering division operates out of Hazira in Gujarat. What they make there is unglamorous to describe and irreplaceable in practice. Pressure vessels, hydrocrackers, urea reactors, the components that sit inside refineries and chemical plants and process the raw inputs the global energy system runs on. L&T's clients include facilities in Saudi Arabia, the United States, the Netherlands, and South Korea. The reason those clients chose L&T is not price. It is that no credible alternative exists at the scale and specification they require. That is not a commercial relationship. That is structural dependency. Reliance Industries' Jamnagar refinery makes the same point at a different scale. Commissioned in 1999, with an expansion coming online in 2008, Jamnagar processes over 1.24 million barrels of crude oil per day, supplying markets across Europe, Asia, and the United States. Around its perimeter, Reliance planted over 100,000 mango trees, creating Asia's largest mango orchard. That detail is not a footnote. You plant 100,000 trees around a facility when you are certain the facility will outlast the trees. The last company in this story most cleanly illustrates where Indian industrial ambition is going next. Dhruva was founded in Pune, in 2008. Its founders looked at the data protection market, dominated by hardware-dependent systems, and built something entirely different, a cloud-native architecture that required no hardware at all. The incumbents dismissed it. Hardware was how data protection worked. Everyone knew that. 75 Fortune 500 companies now use Druva. NASA uses it. Pfizer uses it. Marriott uses it. In 2026, for the second consecutive year, Druva was named a leader in the Gartner Magic Quadrant for backup and data protection platforms. A company founded in Pune now protects the data infrastructure of the organizations running the world's science, its pharmaceutical supply chain, and its hospitality network. 9 companies: vaccines, tractors, generic drugs, biologics, software, luxury automobiles, heavy engineering, oil refining, data protection. Sectors that have nothing obvious in common except that they are all sectors the world cannot function without. And in each one, an Indian company is not competing for a position. It already holds the position. The pattern running through every one of these stories is the same. A gap opened or a market existed. The dominant incumbent either abandoned it, priced itself out, or assumed no credible challenger would appear. And a company from Pune or Hyderabad or Bangalore or Gujarat walked in, built something better or cheaper or both, and became indispensable before the world had time to update its assumptions. The world updated its assumptions about China. It took 20 years of headlines, trade disputes, and manufacturing statistics to force that update. The update on India is overdue by roughly the same margin, and it is happening across sectors that are harder to see because they don't carry a Made in India label on the consumer product. They carry it inside the refinery, inside the vaccine vial, inside the enterprise software stack, inside the pressure vessel holding a Saudi Arabian petrochemical plant together at 900 degrees. Why don't we know these names? Part of the answer is straightforward. Consumer brands get coverage because consumers encounter them. You know Nike because you wear the shoes. You don't hold the pressure vessel. You don't see the vaccine manufacturing line. The products of industrial infrastructure are invisible by design. They are the precondition for the visible world, not the visible world itself. But that only goes so far. China's industrial companies are not consumer brands either, and they receive extensive coverage. CATL makes batteries. SMIC makes semiconductors. Sinopec refines oil. These appear regularly in Western financial and geopolitical reporting because the West decided China's industrial rise is a story worth tracking. India's industrial rise has not received the same treatment. India is a democracy, which makes it less threatening to a certain kind of geopolitical imagination. Its companies tend to operate quietly, without state-backed visibility. And there is still a residual assumption in certain editorial rooms that India is a place where software gets outsourced, not a place where the world's most complex industrial systems get built. That assumption is what every company in this video has already disproved, and yet it persists because assumptions that took decades to build take decades to dismantle, even when the evidence is sitting in plain sight. Consider what it means that Zoho has 100 million users and zero external investment. A $12 billion software company that defeated venture capital as a business model, recruited world-class engineers from rural high schools, and competes with Microsoft from Chennai without ever taking a meeting with a Sand Hill Road investor. That is one of the most interesting business stories of the last 20 years. It has received a fraction of the coverage given to startups that raised $500 million, burned through it, and collapsed. Or consider what it means that Tata Motors, after being told it had overpaid for 2 failing British luxury brands, turned JLR into a profitable, design-forward operation producing cars the original British management couldn't. That story should be a canonical business school case study. It is taught occasionally. It is not the example it should be. The gap between what these companies have accomplished and the attention those accomplishments have received is not random. It reflects a prior that has not been updated. Stated plainly, serious industrial capability lives in certain places. India is not one of those places. Every company here is a direct refutation of that prior, not partial, complete. The 9 companies in this video are not the ceiling. They are the proof of concept. India currently graduates more engineers annually than any country except China. Its pharmaceutical sector is the 3rd largest in the world by volume. infrastructure now being built, the freight corridors, the port expansions, the semiconductor fabrication ambitions, is designed to give the next generation of Indian industrial companies a physical foundation that these companies largely had to build without. Serum Institute built its manufacturing capacity on a horse farm because that was what was available in 1966. Biocon started in a garage because the industrial ecosystem didn't exist yet. Zoho recruited from rural high schools because the engineering college pipeline was inaccessible to the communities it wanted to reach. These companies succeeded despite the infrastructure gaps, not because of them. The companies being founded in India today start from a different position. They have predecessors who proved the model. They have a domestic market of 1.4 billion people that is increasingly sophisticated, and they have a global market that has, sector by sector, experienced what it means to depend on Indian manufacturing and found that the dependency held. The more durable measure of a country's industrial rise is not size, it is embeddedness. It is how deeply a country's output is woven into systems the rest of the world cannot afford to replace. By that measure, India is not on its way to becoming indispensable. It already is. The Serum Institute cannot be replaced in 6 months or 6 years. The Jamnagar refinery cannot be replicated by decree. L&T's Hazira facility took decades of accumulated engineering knowledge to build, and that knowledge doesn't transfer simply because someone else wants to enter the market. These are not positions that can be disrupted by a competitor who decides in 2027 that the market looks attractive. They are positions built on the kind of compounding that takes 30 or 40 years to produce, and that produces, at the end of it, something that looks less like a competitive advantage and more like a permanent feature of the global landscape. The world that runs on Indian engineering is not a future scenario, it is the present one. The only thing that hasn't caught up is the story being told about it.